We use the climb command as an introduction to phase 2 training. It's in this phase of training that we teach the dog responsibility through gentle correction. We also begin using the predictable chain reaction of commands, which will give your dog the ability to know when the correction is coming and the opportunity to avoid it. It's important that you successfully complete the phase 2 climb command before moving on to any of the other phase 2 exercises. The first step is escape conditioning. You're going to put your dog on the climb table using phase 1 technique. Remember to praise and reward your dog for getting in position. Gypsy, climb. Good girl. Good girl. If your dog should step off the table, repeat the word climb and use steady, gentle leash pressure to guide them back on. Good girl. Climb. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. So once your dog is back on, you do want to praise them and you can even pet them, but you're going to withhold the food reward until you say free. Good girl. Gypsy, climb. Good girl. Climb. 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 Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Once you find that it's hard to get your dog to step off of the climb with you just standing stationary next to them, then you can start adding in a little bit of movement. You can take a step to either side and then gradually build until you're able to walk all the way around your dog. Gypsy, climb. Good girl. Good girl. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Remember, your dog can do whatever they want on climb as long as they're not stepping off of the platform. So it's okay if they sit or lay down, or even if they turn around with you as you walk around them. Remember, timing is important, so you want to make sure you redirect your dog to climb as soon as they step off the platform. Gypsy, climb. Good girl. Good girl. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Gypsy, climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Climb. Good girl. While you do want to be quick about putting your dog back on the table, when you're using the Halti, you want to make sure that you're directing their head in a natural direction. So you're not going to want to pull straight back towards the climb, but rather arc them around to it. Good girl. Good girl. Freeze. Once your dog is showing understanding of the correction by responding quickly, it's time to add in the word no as our conditioned punisher. So as soon as your dog steps off the platform, we're going to say no. Half a second later, use the leash to guide them back on while repeating the word climb. Praise your dog once they're back in position. Gypsy, climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. No. Climb. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. No. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Gypsy, climb. Good girl. Good girl. No. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. No. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. Here, good girl. No. Climb. Good girl. Good, free. Once you can walk around your dog, you're ready for resistance. In resistance training, we use the leash to apply slight pressure to the dog's collar, tempting them to break their position. This teaches the dog to hold the verbal command until they're released. A dog's natural instinct is to move toward a distraction. Once they've learned resistance, we can use it in training situations to help them form muscle memory to oppose distraction. To begin with resistance, we're going to put our dog on climb. Gypsy, climb. Good girl. You're going to hold one big loop in your leash, starting right near the clip of the leash, underneath the dog's chin. And just put a little bit of gentle pressure off the table. Good girl. Free. If your dog stays on the table with a little bit of pressure, you're going to release the tension and free them up for their reward. Your goal is not to pull the dog off the table. It's just to apply enough pressure that they sense it and are either going to pose it or step off. Gypsy climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. You want to start to slowly work your way out towards the end of the leash using steady pressure. If your dog should step off the table, you're going to say no, repeat the word climb, and use pressure to get your dog back into position. Gypsy, climb. Good girl. So you're going to use your thumb and your forefinger to keep a little bit of friction on the leash as you slide out. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Initially, you just want to start with one step away from your dog using resistance and build up until you can get all the way to the end of the leash. Make small goals and get success at each level before you move on. Gypsy climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Good girl. Gypsy climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. As you start to work your way out to the end of the leash, you're going to practice your leash handling. Good girl. So you slide out, you're going to use your free hand to start underneath the hand that's holding the leash and slide back in. Good girl. Re-grab the leash from that point. Good girl. Free. Good. Once you're able to work your way out to the end of the leash, you want to start making it variable when you free up your dog. For instance, you're not always going to free your dog up when you get to the end of the 6 feet, but you may return part way to your dog, you may return all the way to your dog and pet them, or slide back out again and then release them. This is just to make sure that the dog is not getting pattern trained, that when you get to the end of the leash, you're going to release them. Rather, they should be relying on the release command of free. Gypsy climb. Good girl. Good girl. No, climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. No, climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Gypsy climb. Good girl. No, climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Now that you're able to slide out to the end of the leash and back, you can start to add in movement as well. Gypsy climb. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Gypsy climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Our next step is to work on placing the leash on the ground and eventually being able to walk away from your dog. Remember to move at your dog's own pace, so you want to build success at each step before moving on to the next one. Good girl. Gypsy climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Our first step is going to be to try and walk to the end of the leash with resistance and see if we can bend to the ground with the leash. No. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. No. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Good girl. That was it. Good. You can see I didn't even place the leash on the ground yet. If your dog is getting up every time you bend, you start with that. And once you get success there, you can try and place the leash on the ground. Gypsy climb. Climb. Good girl. No. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. No. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. When practicing climb, although your dog is learning a new command, it's an excellent opportunity for you to practice proper leash handling skills. So you'll notice that every time I put the leash on the ground, when I go to correct the dog or return to the leash, I'm always reverting back to starting position with my hands. Oops, climb. Good girl. Good girl. No. Climb. Girl. Good girl. Free. Good. Gypsy climb. Girl. Worrying you? Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. We're going to move from escape conditioning to avoidance conditioning. Up until now, we've only been correcting our dog when they break the command. Now we're going to start incorporating the chain reaction of command when initially asking our dog to climb. Gypsy, climb. Good girl, good girl. Good, so once they get on for this part of the process, we're just gonna free them up. Free, free, good girl. You'll notice that I did not give her a treat for getting on climb, but rather held it until I did the free. You wanna start fading off the first reward at this point. Good girl, Gypsy, climb. No, climb. Good girl, good girl. Free, free. Gypsy, climb. No, climb. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. She's so good. Good girl. You're a good girl. Good girl. No. Climb. Climb. Good girl. Free. You'll start to notice that your dog is learning to avoid the correction by responding on the no. Make sure you hold your position and let the leash slide through your hands as long as your dog is moving toward climb. If your dog should stop or change directions, you want to repeat the command and follow through with the leash correction. Gypsy. Gypsy, climb. No. Good girl, good girl. Free. Gypsy, climb. No. Good girl, good girl.